the trial of the Chicago 7. So I basically went into this film mainly for the Oscar hype surrounding it, and I'm not really a huge fan of courtroom dramas, so there wasn't really much for me to kind of feel motivated to watch this film other than the fact that it's got Oscar hype and a lot of critical acclaim surrounding it. The film was in development for quite a long time, from as far back as 10 years, and it was originally scheduled to be released via Paramount Pictures in September, I believe it was. It was due to the coronavirus pandemic that it was sold to the Netflix streaming service, and then it became available to stream freely in October. So I don't know if it would be one that I would happily just go and pay, £14 to go and see in the cinema. It's not really my kind of thing, but you know what, I'm thinking now, I'm glad that I actually got the opportunity to see this for free, pretty much. So a bit of context about the film. It's another story from the 60s in America, the relationships between the people and other countries as well. So it's a piece of history that, as small as it probably is when you look at the bigger picture of the things that were going on at the time, it's something that has been made for the cinema, and obviously it's got a story to tell. Based on the infamous trial of the Chicago 7, consisting of Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Froines and Lee Viner. The film takes place in 1968 during the Vietnam War, a very heated phase of American history, in which the group were charged with conspiracy, having participated in the protest at the Democratic National Convention in response to the war. So obviously it was a very dark and unusual phase in American history, and I think why this film did really well in kind of telling that story was from a production perspective, by including use of real footage and archive material to illustrate that realistic tone and, idea of how things were back then. And while it's not necessarily a docudrama, which is pretty much a documentary and a drama combined together, I think why it was good that they used things like real footage and archive materials is because it kind of displayed a sense of realism. While a lot of biopics and stories based on real events have been very theatrical, very melodramatic, in not necessarily the characters as such, but more so the narrative structure, where a lot of the actual historical facts are quite questionable. And I'm sure there is the case of that in this film, but it was just how they incorporated that idea that made it seem a bit more authentic than perhaps a lot of biopics that we do see at the moment. Like the opening sequence, for example, you didn't necessarily just see footage and photographs of the actual riots from 1968. You saw incidences in America at the time that kind of showed how corrupt and how dark things were back then. You saw photos and footage of Martin Luther King and the story about his assassination, and Malcolm X and other things surrounding the Vietnam War and all those things. So I think including this was particularly important, especially as the title suggests, that most of the film will take place in a courtroom. So it's almost like they had to do it, because otherwise if they didn't include real materials or real live content as it's based on a true story, it might just be like, it might just feel like a stage play where they're just in a courtroom and that's it, really. So they had to include things like that in the film. I think the clever parts of the story was based on a trial, the trial of the Chicago 7, and we obviously knew that most of the film would be taking place in a courtroom, but the use of other sequences were quite clever as well, in kind of revealing things, telling us information about the characters, why they did what they did, and just the underlying themes of corruption and discrimination at the time as well. And I think because a lot of the characters have different backgrounds as well, and I think that was quite nice how collective they were, because they have different morals, different reasons as to why they protested and why they defend themselves, really. So they're doing it for themselves individually, all being different people, but they're doing it for America collectively as a country. So as I say, there were themes of corruption and discrimination against certain groups and certain ideologies in America at the time. And I think what I enjoyed about it from a production standpoint, as well as a narrative structured one, it was obviously set in the 1960s, but it was modernised as a film for a 21st century audience. Much of that was down to the directing of the film, which of course it was done by Aaron Sorkin. He's someone who has probably had more of a screenwriting career, having done A Few Good Men, Charlie Wilson's War and The Social Network, for which he actually won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. And in the trial of the Chicago 7, he writes the script, but he also makes only his second directorial film. Originally, Steven Spielberg was attached to direct the film back in 2007, and apparently the late Heath Ledger was supposed to be playing Eddie Redmayne's character Tom Hayden, so that would have been an interesting film to see had that really happened. And I thought Aaron Sorkin did a good job, because he kind of struck that nice fine balance between a documentary in the sense that it was obviously based on a real event and the use of footage and the way it was structured, but at the same time kind of creating that melodramatic feel of how characters are introduced, how the story is executed. And I sometimes think that's quite a hard line to draw, and he did a very, very good job, and I'm sure he'll be up for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars. So on to the performances. I think it's one of those films where it's definitely worth seeing just for the acting alone because of how well everybody did in it. Although there are a number of Americans in the film, there were some British actors who had to really kind of step up to the plate and not only put on a very convincing American accent, but to use that as a string to their bow in their performance to create a story and a performance that was a crucial piece of American history during a very dark time. There's not really a particular leading actor in the film, I would say, but I'll start with Eddie Redmayne, who plays Tom Hayden, who's a both defendant who's been charged but also who's an activist, and it was good to kind of get an understanding of his character and to pull off a very dramatic performance. The Hayden character is very passionate as to why he stood for what he believed in and why he did what he did, and Eddie Redmayne did a very, very good job. And to be fair, although Redmayne is one of those very well-spoken British actors who has a very distinctive voice, he pulled off the American accent really well, and I thought he was absolutely brilliant in it. And Sacha Baron Cohen was just fantastic. And to be fair to him, it was probably the first time in his whole career that he had to put on an accent, an American one, for a dramatic character, not for a comedy. And because he had to put on an accent to create a dramatic performance, it was a real step in the dark for him. Although we have seen him in some other dramas over the years where he has delivered a very authentic, emotional performance, like Hugo. And for his role as Abby Hoffman, he's tipped for an Oscar nomination, and I can't imagine why. And also, Sir Mark Rylance says William Kunstler, who is the defence counsel on part of the Chicago 7, did an absolutely fantastic job as well. And I think he is one of those actors, in my opinion, who peaked at a very late stage of his career, who obviously has been an actor for a very, very long time, but has just delivered performance and suddenly shot up while he is in his 50s and 60s. A bit like Christoph Waltz, really, and there's something about him that I just really admire. He just does a terrific job in this one, and I think I would probably go as far as to say that he deserves the Oscar buzz and nomination possibility like Baron Cohen does. And another performance in this film that was just absolutely fantastic was that of Frank Langella as Judge Julius Hoffman, whose character was pretty much central to the overall verdict of the case and the trial. And as a character, I hated him. He wasn't respectful, he wasn't lenient, he wasn't fair, and it was just discriminating. How I felt watching him play that character was a testament to Langella's performance, because it doesn't take much to really dislike a particular character, and that character I really did not like. And like I said, that was a contributing factor to how well Langella did in the role. And also Joseph Gordon-Levitt made an appearance as federal prosecutor Richard Schultz. So overall, the trial of the Chicago 7 is something that isn't my cup of tea personally, and it's not one that I would immediately go and drive to the cinema immediately to go and watch. But it just showed me that although you might not necessarily be a big fan of a particular type of story, there are also other contributing factors that you have to look out for where it does deserve praise, and that is particularly down to the performances. It is probably one of those films where you need to do your research and have the knowledge about the trial before actually watching the film, and you probably just need to be an American who lived in the 1960s. And what I got from it was that it was educational in the sense of that there is corruption and discrimination within a court, a place where things are meant to be judged fairly and equally based on evidence. But when you look at it from the bigger picture, there are bound to be a number of different other reasons as to why these riots happened in the first place. A TV series might have stretched it, but I think because it's a film that's only consisting of 2 hours, they had only a certain amount of time to cram all the information in. So the film is currently available to stream on Netflix, so I'd highly recommend you watch it. And if you have seen it, what did you think? Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you did go on to enjoy this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and have a notification bell tick for every single time I upload a video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everybody.